Welcome, everybody. This is a special meeting of the Board of Directors of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District for Sunday, July 7th, 2013. Rena, you have some announcements for us.
Good morning. This meeting is being fed live over the internet. The public can view this meeting by going to our website at www.kmpud.com and follow the appropriate link. If the public would like to make a comment, they may send an email to kmpud@volcano.net. Standish and Grady will not be participating in the meeting today. He will be absent. And we welcome Sean Gamble today. That's it.
Thank you, Rena. And do you want to, Michael?
Dave Brightley will be on teleconference during the Out Valley portion of the meeting. With working with the board president, staff has made some changes to the agenda format and packet. We've added a corrections to agenda. You'll notice that as item 5. Items can be pulled, rearranged, clarified. No action items can be added during this section. So this is to make the agenda a complete package that you'll be looking at today. We've added the adoption of the consent calendar, which is item 6. This is a regular practice for routine items not needing discussion or other actions. So this is a consent calendar that could include proposals, minutes, consent, issues that typically would be more approved by motion rather than brought forward. Board members may ask minor questions with regards to those items that are included in the consent. Board members may bring forward any item for more in-depth discussion or action. So if you have a correction to the minutes that you didn't see previously, then we would bring that forward under item number 7, consent items brought forward, so that they could be approved and adopted by separate action. If you had a slight question to the consent, what is this bill for painting, and I could answer that quickly, then that could be still in the consent calendar. However, if you wanted to discuss that in more detail, we would pull the consent to have it discussed in more detail when Eric felt that it was appropriate in the regular agenda. Is there any questions on consent calendar and the concept of a blanket approval for items that are pretty normal and routine?
I think it's fine. It's got to get comfortable with how much questioning there is before things start to drop off of there and onto the regular agenda, which is...
It should be basically almost none. I mean, basically, if it's more than was at the right date on that, item or something like that. If it's much more than that, we'll just pull it and put it on the agenda, just like we used to have it. But this is a way to try to streamline our meetings a little bit. It's extremely routine and normal way the public agencies work on their agendas.
Completely support that. I think that's a good initiative. Appreciate it.
Lastly, we've added the consent items brought forward. This would be for separate discussion. This is where items on the consent calendar can be acted upon. The board president can place these items once they're brought forward anywhere in the agenda where he sees fit. District staff has continued to make a concentrated effort to share information and write emails to the board during the month so as to get information out as soon as available. So I hope that you're seeing our emails and seeing information come out so that you're not inundated on Thursday with 200 pages to read. And then we're now producing the packet. Thank you. And now we're producing the packet on Wednesdays rather than Thursdays to give it an additional day in order to absorb the material. So we're trying to get this material out as quickly as possible to give you enough information so you can make qualified decisions.
That's a possible suggestion on this consent calendar. Could you maybe put the pages that it includes?
Sure.
Just for clarification. So
the page numbers, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that? I mean, is that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Right
so
now,
we're clear on what's.
Yeah. Right now,
if we adopt the whole consent calendar, we can just say, well, pages such and such, and.
Yeah, we could put it right on the agenda. It is on page 4 of the packet.
Okay.
pretty much anyway.
Oh, okay, that's the summary right there. Okay, well, all right.
that has the
That's
page
good
number.
enough then. That's good
Okay.
enough. Just getting comfortable with it, you know.
Yeah, no, it's
the
a new thing
format.
for us, I know.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, Peter, when they have the roll call.
Sure. O'Grady absent. Andy
Here.
Rickard
Here.
Dornbrook here, and Epstein here.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, item 4 on the agenda is oral communications and public input. This is the time for members of the public to speak on an item that's not on the agenda. If you'd like to do it, just state your name, and you're welcome to bring any topic up. Okay, seeing none, we'll move to item 5. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda unless there's a correction to the agenda or consent calendar that anyone would like to make. Michael?
Yeah, I would like to pull items 8G and 8H off the agenda.
8G and H are off the agenda. These are the Mello-Roos actions because KCP has not yet been ready to provide us the materials at the planning committee or to the board, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, with that correction or to the agenda, may I have a motion to approve the agenda as corrected?
I'd like to so move.
I second the motion.
Okay, favor?
Aye.
Okay. We now move to the adoption of the consent calendar. Is there any item on the consent calendar that you would like to remove? Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt the consent calendar as written.
Move we adopt the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. See how easy that is. 4 items done.
So we got to do 5 and 6 every time? They both have to be done?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we now move to agenda item 8. 8A is discussion and possible action regarding the design timeline, bidding process, costs, and construction activities associated with the Out Valley Power Line project. Welcome, Michelle.
Good morning.
Michael.
All right.
We have started construction. Instead of 100% of the construction project left to be done, we have less. The biggest obstacles over the first 2 weeks have definitely been unmarked and/or abandoned lines on Crooked Meadows Drive. All lives found had to be treated as if they were live, which slows the process down. District staff has been positioned at the dig site continuously, which streamlines the response when we find abandoned lines or lines that weren't marked. Most of the lines that weren't marked were Volcano, and of course they had some repair issues to do throughout the course. All in all, Kirkwood Meadows Drive construction has been successful. Q&D should be done trenching on Monday with paving to be completed starting on the 15th. On page 8 in your packet are the key dates for the project. Right now we are out to bid for the timber harvest and steel poles and should go out to bid for overhead construction on July 9th. A second amendment has gone out on the steel poles suggesting an alternate bid method. The original package asked bidders to determine what they could deliver the poles, when they could deliver the poles, and asked the contractor to state the delivery date. The second amendment provides for an alternate bidding mechanism in which the district requests that 10 poles be delivered by October 15th. On the on-time delivery of these 10 34K poles will be part of the selection criteria for selecting a contractor, but will also carry an increased liquidated damages clause. So if we mobilize and we're out there ready with holes dug and they don't deliver the poles, there's an increased liquidated damages for that. The hope is that on bid opening on July 15th, we will find several bidders who are able to meet the timeline at affordable rate. To that end, it is staff's recommendation to authorize the general manager and board president to award the Out Valley Overhead owner-furnished material weathered steel pole contract to the lowest responsible bidder based on the engineer's recommendation, the concurrence of process by the general counsel, the president's signature on the contract, and that the maximum amount of the bid be no more than 110% of the engineer's estimate. These dollar amounts that we're talking about is the engineer's estimate of $1.6 million could not be exceeded by more than by 10%, or a total fund of 1.765. Should the bids come in higher than that amount, district staff in consultation with the board president would determine if a July 20th meeting would be necessary. So I'm going to pause there and ask for questions from the board.
This is the delivered cost of the poles to the work site or to staging areas defined in the bid?
Yes. So this is a stream, of course we need these stool poles as quickly as possible. If we can find a contractor or multiple contractors that can deliver on the October 15th date, we want to get as many days as possible from the opening date, which is the 15th. We could, under this scenario, be able to award by the 17th. This has been discussed with Board President Rickard.
Where are they going to deliver the poles? Peddler Hill or?
No, the poles would be delivered to a staging area right by Lower Bear River Reservoir. There's a PG&E has a stage or a laydown area there on the northwest side of the dam, I believe.
They can drive them down that road?
Correct. They come in sections.
Oh. Okay.
So it's not like an 80-foot pole.
Oh, okay.
They come in
So it's
smaller
very-
sections.
Oh, okay.
So the bid opening is July 15th, and what time's that going to be, and is it here as usual? Have a get together in this room?
Yes, and the board members are invited to call in if you're not present. And I think
I'll probably physically be here, but what time is the?
Is it 4 o'clock? They're typically at 4
They
o'clock.
typically, I believe that one might be at 4:30.
Yeah, I can check on my calendar.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Because I think what Michael is looking for is a motion to
Yeah.
approve the process.
I think
that's
the
been
process sounds good.
articulated.
There's lots of constraints on it. I mean, you're going to be able to immediately move to closure within certain bounds, which seem like the obvious ones that would say, yeah, we got us a winner, and feel like we got a qualified bidder. They're within spitting distance of the engineered price, and we can blame it on you later. It's all
Yeah,
good.
that's right. My name will be on it.
And if the once discussion is done, I can restate the motion because I think it's important to.
Right. Yeah. My only question, as I've thought about this, Michael, not about the process, but about, there's the increased liquidated damages. This is something that's really important to us, I think. I mean, to the schedule. I mean, if we're serious about getting done by November 2014. I mean, is this a situation, and maybe it's too complicated a question at this late date, but would it be reasonable to also have an incentive in there? I mean, in other words, if I'm a provider of this steel, I mean, I guess if I really want the job, I'll go for it. But on the other hand, I might say, really, what's in it for me?
The way that the bid is scheduled at this point with this last addendum is that the manufacturers can list an alternative price for these poles.
Okay.
So they could say, we want X amount for the
Okay.
poles delivered this year and a different amount for next year.
Okay, great. That's perfect then.
And secondly, the incentive for delivering the poles on time is that part of the selection criteria process,
Right.
the points, is the delivery schedule. I mean, the biggest points are, I think it's 75 points for the cost, and then it's, I think, 15 points for the delivery, and then 10% on the drawings, the shop drawings that will come through.
Right. Okay, good.
You're
Okay.
assuming this is going to be one successful bidder. You're not talking about segmenting the business as a possible response to what you see in the bids. I think it's going to be monolithic.
Yes, so there was discussion on separating it between the 34K and the 115, but I think that has not been.
No, we felt that we would have a better chance to get better bids by having everything packaged together as one bid.
Okay, Michael, would you like to restate how you'd like the motion to be stated?
Staff's recommendation for the board to motion to authorize the general manager and board president to award the Out Valley Overhead owner furnished material weathered steel pole contract to the lowest responsible bidder based on the engineer's recommendation, concurrence of process by general counsel, president's signature on contract, and that the maximum amount be no more than 110% of the engineer's estimate of $1.6 million for a maximum award of $1.765 million.
I'd like to move that we approve this recommendation.
Okay, do I have a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? Any comments from the audience? Alan?
Just a question, have you discussed this with potential bidders and got any feedback?
Yes, we have. We've actually, we have polled all of the manufacturers that have, we sent plans to or sent invitations to bid on. And so there are some that we feel will be able to.
So nobody's going to be surprised by this?
Correct.
Further comments or questions?
What were the numbers again, Michael?
The
1.1 million and
The engineer's estimate is $1.6 million, and the award contract, the maximum award that would be allowed through general manager and President Rickard's authorization would be 10% more than that, or 1.765.
Okay, all in favor of this motion? Aye. Okay, good. Move on with, continuing with 8A.
Thank you. Should no bidder be able to deliver the poles by the timeline requested, we will place this item on the August 10th board meeting agenda. This would likely mean that no 34K poles would be installed in 2013. What needs to be accomplished in 2013 to ensure a 2014 completion date? I think this is a real key discussion. The timber harvest needs to be completed, and that's going to be coming up on the board agenda a little bit later on. And I've brought a map here showing where the timber harvest area is. The installation of the concrete for the 115 poles needs to be accomplished. Remember that the 115 installation is outside of the spotted owl area. So this can start as soon as we can get there, as soon as the weather. The concrete for the 34-5 concrete needs to be installed. I think there's 8 locations where there's concrete that needs to be set and done. We are also looking at the possibility of pre-drilling some of the 34K poles so that when they return in 2014, the excavation would be much simpler. Now this is in areas where there's rock, not where there's soil. You wouldn't want to pre-drill your hole where there's just soil because you'd have slocking in. But if it's a rock installation, it could be much more difficult. And they know they have a good indication of which areas would be rock and soil through geotechnical information. So where there's rock, you can imagine where you're digging down, you need to grout these holes in, and that's where the grouting takes place, is where you have the rock, because there's no, you can't backfill into those areas. The major area of concern is the 34 pole installation, as this falls into the spotted owl area with the limited construction period of the August 15th to when the snow makes the construction unfeasible. No owls have been spotted in this location, and RCI has continued to work with the Forest Service on any leniency we might have with the August 15th date. The Out Valley team continues to believe that this is a 2-year construction project, and we need to continue to complete as much as possible in 2013 to make the 2014 completion date a reality. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dave Wrightley on the phone to give an explanation on how these poles will be installed in such a steep, remote locations.
Welcome, Dave.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
By the way, the bid opening for the steel poles will be 2 p.m. on July 15th.
Thank you.
I'm just going to briefly describe the construction of this overhead transmission line step by step. Of course, it will start with clearing and grubbing the right-of-way, and the contractor will then construct the pads up to 50-foot by 50-foot size where each pole is going to be eventually set. They need a surface that they can work off of. Being as a lot of the 115 kV right-of-way is inaccessible by vehicle, construction of the pad as well as everything else that happens subsequent to that is going to be done by bringing men and equipment in using helicopters. In most cases, for the 115 right-of-way, below the top of the hill, below the where the pipe comes out of the ground. Let's talk about the foundations a little bit. We've got 3 types of foundations for this project. The drilled concrete piers, Michael mentioned them briefly. These things are typically holes that are 36-inch or larger diameter. Rebar cages are set and tied, and anchor bolts are suspended into rebar cages, which are placed into these holes. These holes will vary in depth depending on the structure loading for each particular pole that's going to be set there and the kind of rock that we encounter down below. But they may be 12 to 15 foot deep, possibly even deeper than that. Once the rebar cage is set in there, the anchor bolts, which are provided by the steel pole manufacturer, are set. Concrete is poured in the hole, and you've got a foundation that you can now set your structure on. The second type of foundation we're going to be using is a micropile foundation. We are using those because they are more economical to construct in areas that are hard to access. So that's the majority of the foundations that are helicopter accessible only down the hill. Micropile foundations consist of a number of smaller drilled piers or drilled piles. Typically these are 4 to 8 inch diameter type piles that are then drilled sometimes 20 or 30 feet into the rock. The micropile contractor will calculate how many piles and how deep they're going to be based on geotechnical information we provide. But we'll also make changes in the field as different types of rock are encountered. But what you can imagine is a series of 4 or 5 of these long rods. It's actually a steel rod inside of a steel conduit that's then grouted with concrete, extending in different directions down into the rock underneath the structure. The micropile contractor then has a critical component, which is a steel plate that they're going to design and construct, which bolts on top of these piles, and that is what our structure bolts on top of, is this steel plate the micropile contractor provides. What you will expect when micropiles are being constructed is there will be airlifting in a number of air compressors and drilling these at these site locations. Last foundation we're going is already mentioned, direct embedded, in which the pole is designed and actually has a coating or a treatment on it to be able to exist in the ground for the life of the project. And the contractor drills a hole somewhat larger than the diameter of the butt of the pole. The pole is placed in the hole. The hole is then tamped with native material if it's appropriate, or some imported aggregate material may be brought in to properly tamp and compact the pole and plumb it. And in the event that a direct embedded pole location is in rock, the design engineer will call for some grouting as some of the base of the pole may be in a hole drilled in solid rock. That's a description of the foundations. Once they're in, the contractor will be bringing these poles in to these structural locations, by vehicle where it's accessible, and using cranes, or by helicopter. The poles are being specified and ordered so that they come in sections, and that the weight of any particular section will not exceed the allowable helicopter weight restrictions for the elevations where they're going to be working, which happens to be about 5,000 pounds for this particular project. The structures will be set like I said, either crane or helicopter. There will be multi-pieces. The second piece will be set on top of the first. These things are not a slip fitting. It fits over, but then the pieces of the poles are bolted together at flanges. Lastly, the majority of the hardware on the poles, the insulators, the dead end insulators, the post insulators, those are typically installed while the structure's on the ground and protected as the pole's being set. Lastly, conductor cables will be pulled in areas accessible to vehicles. They'll be using winch trailers. There will be a set of pulleys up on the structures to accommodate the pulling ropes that they install, that they pull up there. In areas inaccessible to vehicles, you will see helicopters bringing these conductors or pulling ropes from one structure to the next. Once all the conductors are up in the air and on these pulleys at each structure, then the conductor is properly sagged. The tension is accurately measured, and once we are satisfied with the tensions that they've developed, then they actually cut the cables at the dead end points and dead end the cables and do some final tying in at the structures that are what we call tangent structures. That basically results in a power line that is complete. The final jumpers are going to be placed at the KM Green and at the PG&E tap when in coordination with PG&E. Finally, when that line is done, the contractor will actually construct the new taps to the PG&E service locations that are already along that line. And once those taps are cut over, the final requirement for our contractor will be to completely remove the old PG&E line. They've got to actually pull every pole out of the ground. The permit does not allow us to cut them off. And again, that'll be vehicle accessible, or it'll be helicopters used to airlift that stuff out of there. That's a brief description of how you build this transmission line project. Any questions about that?
So everything that was described there, except the manufacture of the poles, must be the substance of the overhead contract. It's all of that is in one big lump for the overhead contract. Correct. But there's got to be a bunch of multiple contractors under that, right? There's helicopter guys and whatever it was, micro footing folks, and there's a bunch of different things. Those all being controlled by the successful bidder of the overhead
Correct.
contract. Okay.
So when we pre-qualified these bidders, do they all have helicopter experience?
The ones that we pre-qualified, yes, they
okay.
all listed that they had helicopters available to them. That was one of the things we did look for.
And the overhead construction estimate has gone up by $650,000. What's the major elements of that?
Oh, we're going to go into
Oh, is that later?
That's
Okay.
Yeah, all I gotta say is wow. I mean, it's
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the underground seems so simple now.
So as people from, a lot of us from the Bay Area, we all read the newspaper every single day now about fascinating things about bolts. Do we understand what we're doing with the bolts? Whether or not they're galvanized, whether or not they've been pickled in hydrochloric acid, blah, blah, blah. Are we on top of the bolts here?
Dave rightly is.
Yes.
Right, Dave? You're on top of the bolts.
Whole manufacturers, this is what they do for a living. So we
So
have
the people
we
are
have
doing the Bay
specifications.
Bridge, but
Yeah.
Well, the salt level's a little bit
friendlier. Salt Springs Reservoir. Who knows?
True.
Okay, well, Dave, thanks very much. That was a very good explanation. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Is there any further questions on the schedule? Because I'm going to go into costs next.
As I've said to you in our meetings, Michael, I mean, this obviously is the biggest concern. And as we get to other items here, I think that concern will continue to come out. I mean, every meeting something has slipped, and yet the end date never slips. And I just wanted to, Michael has assured me in conversation with very good explanations that if certain things are done this year and they're assuming we get decent bids, they are feasible this year. That end date is still good. But I'm just asking the team to be realistic about the end date and raise the flag sooner rather than later for us, because it may alter other decisions we make about the pace of construction, how much we borrow, at what time we borrow it, etc.
Now I'd like to direct your attention to page 30 in your packet. This is the revised expense forecast. We have changed the format to include a budget, which we're using as the forecast as of April 29th. And that'll be static. That was the forecast of April 29th that we'll use as our static column. The next column is what we have expensed to date, followed by our current forecast. The difference between the budget of 429 and the current forecast is shown under the next column, and the difference between the current forecast and the expense to date is reflected under the remaining forecast to expense. Several items have contributed to the increase of $1.5 million in the current forecast as compared to budget. The full cost of the timber harvest settlement of $119,000 is being reflected with no allowance for the timber harvest proceeds, which are difficult to project. The worst case costs in relation to the volcano lines being damaged or having to be relocated are reflected. It is anticipated that these costs will also come down. The addition of a 5% contingency on portions of the underground construction costs have been included, amounting to a $443,000 increase. And finally, an increase in the cost of the overhead construction of $653,000 is shown, as Director Epstein mentioned. This is primarily due to the anticipated increased cost of the poles, but also due to power and design, PG&E design issues. And Dave Rightly is here to address this increase. Dave?
Thank you, Michael. Yes, the recent progress that we made with PG&E in determining the height and the strength requirements of the steel poles has allowed Exponential to firm up the pole requirements. Exponential decided to increase the estimated cost of the 115 kV and 35 kV steel poles over the original cost submitted by Power Engineers with the new information we have now of the structure loads and heights. In addition to that change, we included a small component of cost for tree removal. That's the only other change we made in the overhead estimate. The tree removal is a component of the project that the overhead contractor will do. He will do the tree removal below the on the steep hill, but basically the 115 kV section below where the pipe comes out, as that is not going to be a part of the timber harvest contract. But primarily, I would say that our change is we've got to a point where we know what size and height these poles are going to be, and based on that, we firmed up our cost estimate for those steel poles, and it went up.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Regarding the budget, just to be really clear, the $29,056,000, which is in the first column, was the April 29th forecast, and we just decided to say let's keep that static so we understand what changes over time. And we know we want to come in under $30 million. But I believe that Howard Barnes' analysis, as well as our Russ financing, was really based on something closer to $32 million. Do I remember that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay.
$30 million. Well, $2 million coming out from cash, but $30 million coming from
right. Okay. I mean, obviously, the 29 to 30 million is going to be a very good thing to continually strive for. But if it gets up to 31 and 32, we start taking other actions, perhaps. Okay. Not sure what those actions would be, but we will take them. Okay.
Could I ask a clarifying question, please? So, Dave, you said the poles, more carefully speccing the poles, is what drove the $653,000 increase, and that's buried in this budget. It's buried in the overhead construction, so you can't see the poles versus other elements of the overhead construction. So, help me just, at summary, understand how much did the pole bid increase from X to X plus $653,000, and what percentage that is on the base?
The We increased the cost of the 115 kV steel pole significantly from the original power estimate of $12,000 per pole. This is the material price up to $50,000, and that resulted in up to an $800,000 change. However, because we were firming up the price of the poles, a contingency that had been included in the original power estimate, we removed that contingency. And that plus a small change that we made in the 35 kV poles, we had estimated them, we estimate them now at $15,000. The original power was $12,000 per pole. And in working with PG&E, one additional 35 kV pole was added. We were at a quantity of 37 compared to the original 36 estimated by power.
So we quadrupled the price estimate of the 115 kV poles.
That is correct.
And there's 21 of them?
Correct.
That's a pretty big change.
Yeah, these poles are significantly taller, and the loading requirements for PG&E, which have to do with considering extreme winds, other cases such as a broken wire. I'm not sure if those considerations were ever made in the original estimates by the previous engineer, because once Exponential put those cases in and designed the structures got significantly larger, not only taller, but having higher strength requirements than what we saw in the original design.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions or comments from the audience on this topic? Okay. Does that finish 8A or?
Not quite.
Okay.
There's no other questions. I'd like to introduce Michelle Gamble, who's going to give us a more detailed overview.
Good morning. I'll be brief. I think Michael's covered most of what's going on with the project. I wanted to indicate that KMPUD, just so you have an understanding of what's happened along Kirkwood Meadows Drive, their daily production, even dealing with the multiple utilities that we had to deal with along there, they had 1,000 linear foot day. They've had a 900 linear foot day. Their lowest production day was just under 500 linear feet, and that was a day that they worked a half a day and took another half a day to prepare the site for an incoming storm. So they've made excellent progress along Kirkwood Meadows Drive, and so we anticipate as soon as they get out away from all of the utilities in this area, they're really going to be able to fly. They're going to move from Kirkwood Meadows Drive to the west side of Silver Lake Bridge, and from that point they're going to just progress west. They're going to leave the Carson Spur portion for 2014, and that's, I think we had talked about that at a previous meeting. So they've already started clearing and grubbing in certain areas, and they're just getting all staged and ready to go. So we're very, very pleased with the progress they've been making, and very pleased with the effort that they've been putting forth. We received our Caltrans permit officially. We received the first half of the permit last Monday, and the second half, the contractor's permit, on Tuesday. So there was a meeting with Caltrans on Wednesday, but I haven't received an update from the contractor yet to see how that went. But we've had numerous conversations with Caltrans' representatives, so we anticipate a very smooth working relationship with Caltrans. Our FERC and our DSOD and our CPUC permits are all in the process. I received an email from PG&E about 2.5 weeks ago that said our FERC authorization should be coming in early to mid-July. So they were FERC was actually out on site, and they were pleased with the project and didn't see any issues. DSOD, I received comments from DSOD on Friday, and I'll be preparing my response back to them on Monday. The comments were just clarification that they asked on 3 different issues, and they were very minor. Dave and I discussed them on Friday, so that response will be going back to them. So I'm optimistic that everything is moving forward very well with those authorizations. We anticipate our CPUC notice to construct on July 27th. So with the overhead project, everything is in line with having all of our permits in place. We'll talk about the timber harvest on that agenda item. I think that's all I really needed to update the board on, unless there were any other questions.
I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Should we see sectionalizing cabinets yet on Kirkwood Meadows Drive? or-
No, what we're going to do, the intent or the construction scheduling of this, they're going to be installing the sectionalizing cabinets along Kirkwood Meadows Drive later in the construction season. What we want to do is we want to pull cable on a section of the project, and we discussed this last Tuesday, that the section where we want to pull, or the areas we want to pull cable are the areas within Kirkwood Meadows Drive. So the sectionalizing cabinets will come in right when they're going to be pulling the cable. So in Kirkwood Meadows Drive, we'll put the cabinets in. We have to finish the section that crosses under Kirkwood Creek. We can't do that until there's no flow conditions. So that's the last piece of work that will come in. That can be done once everything is all paved over as well.
And I'd just like to congratulate the district and Michelle in particular for the receipt of the Caltrans permit. That's been in the works for years, and it gives us the flexibility that we need to continue the project.
And all the other permits as well, Michelle.
That was a biggie.
Are there any questions from the audience of Michelle? Any more from the board?
We're going to have signs that say on A8 saying this traffic delay brought to you by the Kirkwood Meadows Utility District.
Winner's phone number down at the bottom. Please call.
Yeah. Los Altos. Okay, thank you. Now that's 8A.
Yes, that's it.
Okay. We'll move on to 8B, another really important topic and one that's been in the works for quite a while. Discussion and possible affirmation of previous approval of interconnection agreement with PG&D. Michael.
On March 30th, the board approved resolution 1306 authorizing the president of the board to sign the interconnection agreement with PG&E after consultation with the general manager and general counsel. The interconnection agreement sets forth the construction costs and schedule and the ongoing operating relationship with PG&E and the district with regards to this project. It sets forth the term of the agreement. It sets forth the district's ongoing maintenance expense. It sets forth the amount of anticipated tax on the improvements that will be deeded back to PG&E. It sets forth the conditions necessary to provide service along the route, for example, to the Caltrans maintenance station. And it puts the district on notice that if the Bear River Reservoir Dam is raised in the future, that the district would have to make the necessary improvements over that dam. After this approval on March 30th, problems arose with the timeliness of receiving review comments for the design of the overhead line. Thanks to action by board member Epstein and a community member, PG&E management has become very involved and has devoted the needed resources to meet the district's timeline. Weekly meetings are being held with PG&E management to go over their current action items and schedules, and I placed an example in the board packet for your review. With this focused attention, the board requested that staff re-engage PG&E on the two issues of the interconnection agreement that were still of concern, namely the ITCC tax and the operation and maintenance charge. PG&E has met internally and reaffirmed their position that their interpretation of the tax law requires that all costs associated, including the design and soft costs, would be subject to the ITCC tax and to the O&M charge. In order to move forward with the project, the interconnection agreement needs to be signed and go into effect in order for PG&E to collect the funds to build their facilities and to continue on their design review, detailed in the closed TFA and payment schedule. They are actually looking at constructing their poles this year on a accelerated timeline. They're nervous there's a peregrine that was actually seen nesting on the Salt Springs Reservoir, which could affect their construction schedule in their area. So they're actually moving forward this year with the construction of the 4 towers that they'll be installing. It is staff's recommendation for the board to reaffirm its acceptance of the agreement at this time. Additionally, staff and hopefully board member Epstein will find a tax attorney to review the issues aforementioned. If we can convince PG&E that their position is flawed and we can change the and we could change the items included in the ITC and OM time during the truing up period at the end of the project.
Question, Michael. The ITCC, as noted in the agreement, is at 22%. Are they still, they being a PG&E, still applying for 34% rate?
Yeah, that's the latest information I have.
And is our current forecast for the total project cost including the 34% or the 22%?
34.
And do I also understand correctly that the truing up really means they will provide us with their actual costs, not the plus or minus 50 or 25% costs that are included here?
Yes.
And do you have any sense at all whether, I mean, to date, are they coming in lower than their projections, or do you have any sense of that? Lower, at, or higher?
Overall, through the engineering agreement that we've had, they've been lower than their projections. I have no idea as far as currently.
Sure, okay. Okay, any questions from the board?
I just want to clarify, we're providing them with any poles, right? Or are they,
Excuse me?
we're providing the steel poles to them?
No.
No, they're doing their own.
They have 4 steel towers that they'll be doing, and that's on a completely separate bid process through them.
Okay.
And they don't have to go out to bid. They went straight to who they wanted to.
Okay. So all the items on page 39 are all their actual work, none of that's we're providing, right? That's the exhibit A1.
Yeah, this is part of the.
Right. So that's okay.
So what you're saying is that $5 million we don't have to
Oh, no.
Oh no, we'll pay for it.
We're
forever.
paying for it all, yeah.
And we're paying the ITC on that too?
No, we're not paying the ITC, but the real thing that hurts us is the forevermore O&M expense, which approximates the same cost as buying power.
It's the 20.
It's close to, it'll cost us close to 5 cents a kilowatt hour
per year.
for the rest of, and it has an escalation, and forever.
Yeah, and the
That's-
thing is that
that's
it's
the real-
being applied to their engineering reviews
Right.
and so on. They have nothing that, has nothing to do with O&M. That's the issue that we have. It doesn't have to do with just the material things out in the field.
Well, Howard has pointed out that it's normal practice to not do a line item thing, but look at the total thing and then use a percentage factor. So they're not inventing a new process for us.
Are they using a percentage factor?
Yes. Yeah. So they're doing something that's industry norm, if you will. The path, so we'll see what we can do, but
Yeah,
we're budgeting
for the worst. Or
For-
what we think is what we think may be the
for,
worst.
what we think is industry standard. Yeah.
Any questions from the audience on this IA matter? So I guess what we want is a motion to affirm the previous approval of the IA.
Right.
Yeah, I would move that we affirm our previous approvals.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, we move on to item 8C, discussion of possible bid award for the construction of the KM Green grading and drainage project. And for those who don't know, that KM Green is the substation down at the lower end of this whole run of line.
On June 24th, the district held the bid opening for the KM Green grading and drainage project. 2 bids were received within the timeline allowed. One from Campbell Construction in the amount of $422,474, and one from Q&D Construction in the amount of $455,200. Both bids were from pre-qualified contractors who seemed qualified to complete the work. The Out Valley team has done their evaluation and have found that both contractors have met the bidding requirements. A third bid was received 10 minutes after the pre-described opening deadline and had to be rejected. The engineer's estimate for this phase of the project was $325,000. Michelle Gamble of RCI is here today to discuss areas where the actual construction bids deviated from the engineer's estimate.
When we prepared the bid estimate for the KM Green substation, there were some items that we had to make some judgment calls on. What we anticipate is there to be excavation of the site, there to be material that can be used on site for grading around the pad, and the material that will be off-hauled from the site. What we found with the two bids that we received is both of the contractors were very conservative in their prices of material, having to off-haul material or having to import material. I believe in fact due to the location. It is a drive from anywhere. So when we looked at the bids, the two biggest discrepancies between what I had estimated and what came in were the disposal of the excess native material and the import and placement of the fill material. What I've discussed with Michael is these are areas that when we were looking at the quantities in the bid, we went very conservative with the quantities, and we assumed that a lot of material would have to be off-hauled and a lot of material would have to be imported. We've had discussions with the Forest Service about spoiling excess material on site. We have area to the south of the substation between the pad and the existing access road, that a Forest Service access road there, that's out of the riparian conservation area. The Forest Service will allow us to spoil excess material there. So one of the large bid items for off-hauling material, I really believe we can reduce that amount. One of the other items was we weren't quite sure the quality of the material that we would have on site. We have Geocon, geotechnical firm, under contract right now to do some geotechnical investigation. We'd anticipating having that geotechnical investigation at the substation site done a little bit later in the year. We want to have that done this month, and we're actually looking at getting them out there in the next 2 weeks, so that prior to mobilizing any contractor for the KM Green site, we'll be able to have the results of that geotechnical investigation, and we can better identify the quality of material, and we can make any change orders with that project and look at being able to use that material more on site, or give the contractor a heads up going into the project for material that they can use on site. So we think we can get the cost estimate, the anticipated cost for the projects down even further. A side note to that is when we did the design, we looked at having some fairly, I won't say fairly steep, but 3-to-1 slopes for any of the fill areas. On the 3-to-1 slopes, due to the soils up there, we looked at using a geotextile. By being able to spoil more of the material on site, we can flatten those slopes, we can eliminate the need for a geotextile, and we can achieve some project savings there as well. So when I looked at the cost estimates that we received from the two contractors, I saw about $60,000 potentially where we could have a cost savings on the project. With the additional information that we're going to receive, we could even see that go down even further.
Michelle, and these are all subject to unit costs, so it's not like negotiating with a contractor. It's
Correct.
Objective. They've already given us the unit costs.
Correct. And that was one of the reasons why we set it up this way. We took the unknowns that we knew for some of the material, and we assigned a unit cost to it. We didn't want to lump sum those items because we wanted the flexibility going in, saying we have more material we can spoil on site, you have to import material. We wanted to be able to adjust that with the project itself. So when I looked at these, I was disappointed that they came in higher than we had estimated, because I thought we had been fairly conservative with our estimate. But when I looked at the items where they were higher, they were the two items that have the greatest unknown with the project, so I understand where the contractors were coming from. But we have flexibility with those items.
And those are line items 7 and 8 in their detailed bid.
Correct.
And 6, right? To some degree. Placement of native material generated on site.
We were pretty close to the estimate on that one.
Okay.
One of the new access road construction, we weren't, from the low bidder, we weren't very off on that.
Mm-hmm.
The new pad substation construction, that's a lump sum item. We were in between the two bidders that were received, and unfortunately, the lowest bidder was the higher of the two on that one.
So what you're suggesting is that item 7 and 8, which is disposal of excess material and import and placement of fill material, which total about $78,000 here, you think is excessive and can be reduced significantly?
Right, especially the disposal of the excess native material. That's a $52,000 item, and there is the potential that we could spoil all of that material on site.
Okay.
And so I look at that and I see a lot of opportunity, but I tend to be conservative, so I wanted to make sure we had a line item for off-hauling that material.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience on this bid package? Any further questions from the board?
Well, I guess I wonder where this one recommendation for which bid to accept. So we're
Yeah. So the district board has two options here. It can reject all bids and rebid the project with additional geotechnical information and material spoiling ideas, which could reduce the cost. However, rebidding would almost certainly put this into 2014 construction season, which is already jam-packed as it stands today. I think that we can find those savings with working with the current contractor. Michelle Gamble has written the district a letter of recommendation, and she recommends that we go with the Campbell Construction bid, the lowest responsible bidder. So it is staff's recommendation, supported by the engineer's recommendation, for the board to award the contract to Campbell Construction in the amount of $422,474, and furthermore, for the board to direct staff and consultants to work with the contractor to reduce the cost of the contract with additional geotechnical work and unit price reductions.
Are the bidders that are likely in the picture to do the construction of the KM Green station, did they overlap with these folks that are bidding on the grading and drainage?
We had 9 pre-qualified bidders from the pre-qualification process we did last fall. They were invited to bid on this project as well, and then we had 9 additional pre-qualified contractors from the process we did in the spring. And so there was that overlap. We did have pre-qualified contractors from last fall who picked up plans, but one sent us a letter saying they had other work and couldn't bid on it. So there was that overlap, but they chose not to bid. This is typical work that they would have, had we bid the grading and the electrical as one, they would have had a subcontractor do this portion of the work.
Any other questions?
So I'm sure I'm confused on this detail, but the KM Green substation construction, not the grading and drainage, but the construction of the facility itself, that contract has already been let?
No.
Okay,
No.
so that was my question.
I'm
Was
sorry.
are the people that are going to build the building on this site after it gets done by one of these bidders here, are they the same people potentially, or are they different people? And is there any issue with having one person do the construction on top of somebody else's prepared site that we should be aware of? Or
No, and that was taken into consideration. That's partially why we did it the way that we did it. The substation pad, we are bringing it up to what's the base course elevation. The final course will be a part of the KM Green construction bid that's going to go out. So the contractors, we actually feel that the contractors for the actual substation construction, they're going to have a completed graded site. So they're going to be able to come in very easily, build their foundations, build their grounding grid, and put all of the structures on there. It's going to make their construction very much more simpler, I guess, in 2014.
I'm good, I understand.
Okay.
Just a related question. So after it sits under a winter for a season, does that cause any erosion or other repair work needed? Or?
No, the way that what's included in the KM Green grading project is all of the site stabilization as well.
Uh-huh.
So everything will be either rocked, has a geotextile on any of the steep sections, or revegetated. And so the entire site will be ready. The access road from the current one up to the pad will be ready. So all they'll need to do is come in and use the pad put on the final course and build the substation.
Alan?
Just a note, you said that line item 7, disposal of excess native material, was kind of the key. If I look at these two bids, the $97,000 line item at Q&D has the potential to go down more than the $52,000 item.
I'm sorry, say that again?
That single line item for Q&D's bid, which was the higher bid,
Correct.
was more than the difference. The difference in those two line items was more than the difference in the two bids.
Yes.
So if you could eliminate that line item almost down to zero, wouldn't Q&D be the better choice?
It would, but unfortunately, I don't think that the way that it was bid, I would have a hard time recommending pulling that bid item out because they bid it fairly.
Okay.
Yeah, we would have to go out to rebid, go out with an amended document and get bids back in.
Okay.
Further questions, comments, discussion?
Would somebody like to provide a motion to approve
Sure,
the bid for
I'll move
Campbell
that we
Construction?
approve the bid for Campbell Construction.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And please aggressively, Michelle, please aggressively go after that $60,000.
I will.
Thank you. Okay, we move on to item 8D, discussion of possible approval of timber harvest settlement agreement between the district and the United States Forest Service in relation to the overhead portion of the Out Valley electric transmission line. Michelle and Michael.
Before the board today is the United States Forest Service Timber Harvest Settlement Agreement for a cost of $119,000. This agreement has been reviewed, modified, and ultimately approved by the district's general counsel. This agreement pays the Forest Service for their loss in revenue from the current and future trees in the overhead and substation areas. We are paying the Forest Service for the current value of the trees to be removed and the value of the trees at full maturity and the future value and the value of future tree growth. Michelle is here to answer any questions. It is staff's recommendation for the approval of the United States Forest Service Timber Harvest Settlement Agreement.
Questions, comments? Questions from the audience?
So this is all very straightforward. USFS boilerplate, they've done it over and over again, and they're applying the same process here that you'd see anywhere else.
And on this map here, the dotted area shows the timber harvest area for your review.
The only comment I'll make on the timber harvest is, as Michael had indicated, the section from the top of Salt Springs, when we went on our tour and we looked down, that section has been excluded from the timber harvest due to the steepness of the terrain. We're putting that into the overhead contract because those trees will be felled and left in place. So we felt it wouldn't be appropriate to have the timber harvest contractor go in and have to just fall those trees and leave them in place. We wanted our contractor for the overhead to do it for their convenience.
How many trees do you think we're going to have to in that section?
I don't have the exact count. I want to say that there's probably upwards of 20 of the larger trees, and then down at the bottom, there's some oaks that will be cut and lopped and scattered.
Okay. That'll make some exciting video.
So do I have a motion to approve the timber harvest settlement agreement with the USFS? Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we go to the revenue portion of this whole thing, right? The whole for revenue portion. Discussion of possible approval of the timber harvest contract in relation to the overhead portion of the Out Valley electric transmission line.
Before the board today is the contract form for the timber harvest contract. In your packet was a draft. I have emailed the final version. The contract calls for the removal of the trees in the overhead and substation portions of the project. This is actually a net income to the district, as contractors are actually bidding on what the net return to the district will be after the timber sale and after they cover their costs of removal, transport, and other services provided. As the bid opening is July 15th, it is staff's recommendation that the board authorize acceptance of the timber harvest contract to the general manager with the signature of the contract by the board president. This approach has been approved by the district's general counsel. We anticipate that the revenue coming back in will be somewhere around $50,000 to $70,000.
We'd like to see that amount. There are some provisions that the Forest Service has placed on our timber harvest where we have certain trees around the substation and around Coal Creek that we have to fall and leave in place for riparian habitat. And then there's mastication of some of the smaller trees. I don't have a good feel for what those prices are going to be. So I've heard this contract could be worth, we could see $50,000 to $60,000 to $70,000 come back to the district, but until I see it, I'm hesitant to throw out a number.
Is it possible that we'll actually see a net cost?
It is possible, and that's why the contract has been set up the way that it has, just in case that happens. And unfortunately, I don't have enough experience with timber harvest to know whether that would be a net cost or not. We have thrown a pretty broad net as far as timber harvesters that we have invited to bid on this, and I've had timber harvesters that have contacted me and said, I want to bid on this. So I'm hoping that there's some hungry people out there.
And it's all road accessible. Is that right?
It's all accessible as a timber harvester would accept it to be or expect it to be accessible.
Right.
It's nothing down on the really steep section.
They'll have to skid eventually.
Yeah.
They can do that with equipment.
In other words, there is some kind of a rough road that goes along the
Correct. And some of this, a portion of this is actually in the Oski Bear thinning area that the Forest Service has done. So there's existing landings that we're taking advantage of. So the contractor, the timber harvester, won't have to go in and construct new landings. They'll have landings that are available to them. There are many timber harvest roads up there already. So it's, even though it's not a huge timber harvest project, it's in an area where there have been previous harvests, so there's an infrastructure that's there.
Okay, so Michael, would you restate the motion the way you'd like to hear it made?
As the bid opening is on July 15th, it is staff's recommendation that the board authorize the acceptance of the timber harvest contract to the general manager with signature by the board president. This approach has been approved by the district's general counsel, and the acceptance would be based on the lowest responsible concept, though there's a high degree of likelihood that there will be an income rather than an expense.
So it would be the highest revenue.
Right.
Correct.
and Eric would have the option of rejecting the proposals, presumably.
He would be the signatory on the contract.
Well, there's no option to reject unless we don't want the construction, right, which we just approved.
Well, that's true.
Okay.
The timber harvest is time sensitive to the start of the construction of the KM Green substation. So if we don't get a timber harvester, that pushes back the KM Green substation project. So time is of the essence.
The same session on the 15th for the polls bids, you're going to do them back to back?
We've set this one up for 4 p.m.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion for the
I'd
form
like
of
to-
contract in the process of signing.
I'd like to move that we establish the process as Michael just outlined.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we now move to item 8F, which is discussion and possible action related to the amount, term, and condition of the third draw on the Rural Utility Services Loan Out Valley power line project. Thank you, Michelle.
Greatly Exponential Engineering.
Has left the conference.
Should I hang up?
And at the board's pleasure, I'd like to thank, and if there's nothing else, Michelle is free
Yes,
to go.
and again,
Thank you.
congratulations on all the permitting and so on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for making the drive up.
Okay, item 6F, Michael, and I assume that maybe Bob Epstein will represent the Finance
Right.
Committee.
Right. As the Out Valley construction proceeds, it is necessary to continue to draw funds to pay for the cost. Each advance with Russ is a separate loan package with its own term, interest rate, call options, etc. To date, the district has taken out 2 advances, one in the amount of $20,637,000 at 2.75% interest rate, and the second was $2.2 million at a rate of 2.47%. Both are for 35-year terms with no call option. The Finance Committee met recently, discussed this matter, and concluded that the district should borrow in the $7 million range with the same long-term, no-call option methodology. Before the board, in the packet on page 137 is a letter and backup to Russ supporting this draw. On page 144, C number 2, requested advance date as contact the district. So I pre-sent this in to Russ with the idea that once the district made a decision, we could pull the trigger on the actual date of the draw. The $7 million basically came, staff had a recommendation of a 3-month coverage, which amounted to around $4 or so million. The total amount that we would actually be eligible to draw is the total Q&D amount, which is about $12 million, and after discussion, the number of $7 million. So I've opened it up to Director Epstein.
So the Finance Committee discussed this at our last meeting, and we came up with 2 principles that we want to use. First of all, our goal is to protect ourselves against rising interest rates and not to try to hedge the markets and seek temporary lows or whatever. And we all feel like geniuses that we have stuff below 2.75% already, but it's due to luck, right? You know, of where we are in the cycle. So that's the first thing, is we're not looking to try to hedge the market, look for temporary dips. We're trying to get as much long-term as we can do. Our second assumption is we try to look at it in periods of time. So we look at this as what's the construction likely to happen before the snows hit. And so that ended up being about 4 months worth of money or so, as opposed to 3. So that's where we ended up with $7.4 million. The Russ guidelines are you request draws in anticipating immediate needs. Our definition of immediate needs is what's likely to happen between now and when the snows typically fall. So those are the 2 guiding principles that we want to use. The other thing I'll mention now, because it's related, is our goal is to bring rates down as quickly as possible. And there's only 2 ways to do that. One is to have increased demand, so we spread costs over a larger base, which is out of our control, but is anticipated to happen. And the second is to pay off portions of the loan. The only way to do that is to have some amount be short-term. So we're leaving some money that can be short-term, meaning 3 to 5 years. That'll be at much lower interest rates. We pay that down with cash buildup. And as we pay that down, that gives us the opportunity to consider rate coverage. So that's why we wouldn't do 100% at 35 years. We'd look at anticipated cash coming in and have the ability to pay down for those things. So that's the overall financial strategy. And with that, that's why we would recommend that we move forward with the $7.4 million requested draw at this point.
So, Michael and Bob, so if we exclude the original $21 million that we borrowed, which covered the powerhouse and all the early, so if we just look at the construction costs of the project, which are the $13 million for underground and the $5 million for overhead and the owner furnished material of several million. Was that like $22 million or something like that? We will have borrowed. Basically, what this implies is that we will only finish in 2013 less than half of the cost of the project.
No.
Of the at the construction of the project is what I mean.
But we still have a, $7 million gets us 4 months, June, July, August, September. We'll have another borrowing for the later half.
Oh, okay. I'm
We'll
sorry.
have
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll potentially have a little bit more
Okay.
to go. But our goal is to always leave enough short-term so we can pay some down, but we still have plenty of opportunity.
Okay. So this doesn't
for that.
represent our estimate of the proportion of construction that will be completed in 2013. It's a little bit shy of that.
Yeah, there's still $3 million as far as our forecast for October and November cost.
Okay.
That
makes it
would
feel
not be
better.
included
Okay.
in this. This is actually borrowing 4 months
4
rather
months.
than the 3 months that we had originally anticipated.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And
Alan?
Alan, you want to add?
Just one more clarification. I think it was a consensus of everybody involved in the finance committee that rates will rise in the long term, but given the yield curve today, long-term rates are so low that they have the opportunity to rise much higher than the short-term rates over the next year or so. So if we want to keep some short-term piece, it's best to borrow the long-term stuff now and leave the short-term piece for the end.
Yeah, that's right. And the planning that Howard did, we planned a total borrowing cost of between 3 to 3.5%. And our internal target is to be at 3% or less total borrowing costs. So we're in good shape to meeting the lower of the two models, the 3 and 3.5%. We think we can be below 3% total borrowing costs.
That's great. Thank you. Rates as of Wednesday were 3.08, is that what I recall?
Yeah, and we think it may drop a little bit next week with our incredible...
Not wanting to time the market, of course.
Not wanting to time the market, but, you know, this is, the next draw is likely to be in the 3% range, not the 2.75, but we could get lucky again.
Yeah.
Michael?
So it's staff's recommendation for the board to authorize the general manager to call Russ on Monday and pull the trigger on the $7 million loan that is detailed in your packet.
And you need a motion to that effect.
I would appreciate it.
If we make that call on Monday, are we going off the FFB rate schedule from Wednesday?
No, they would do it within 2 to 3 days, so
Okay.
it'll be...
It's the date of the actual draw.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so
So,
it'll be next week's
So we've
draw.
got a couple of days to see what the market does.
yeah, we have an opportunity for improvement. So I would like to move that we do the next draw in the amount of $7.435 million.
I'll second that. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Okay, G and H have been pulled from the agenda. We now move to item 8I, which is review and possible action in relation to an electric rate study to comply with requirements of the Rural Utility Service Loan Agreement. Michael and Joe.
For the President's pleasure, can I ask that this be read into the minutes on a previous agenda item? You can take this at any point, but we did this by motion. We should have done this by resolution. I want to make sure that we'll cover our bases.
Okay. Well, why don't we move back to agenda item 8C, which is the bid award of the construction of the KM Green Grading and Drainage Project. And what I'd like to do is entertain a motion to approve resolution number 1310, which is the approval of the bid for the Out Valley KM Green Grading and Drainage Construction Contract with Campbell Construction Company in the amount of $422,474, subject to Russ review and approval. and the treasurer is authorized and directed to sign the contract on behalf of the district, and the secretary is authorized and directed to attest the contract.
Actually, that's the president is authorized to sign it. That's stated wrong.
Okay. The president is authorized to sign.
I move to approve resolution 13-10.
I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
I apologize for that procedural change, but I wanted to make sure I got that right.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, 6I.
One of the requirements of the Rust loans is that we show a minimum coverage ratio tier of 1.05 on a calendar year basis. This includes depreciation, which is over $1 million. Staff has reviewed the first 5 months of 2013 actuals, and combined with the forecast budget for the balance of the 2013 year, we do not feel that we will make the required tier ratio. Will fall short by $431,000. The reason that the district will not make the 1.05 tier ratio is that our current budget does not call for this tier ratio with the biggest production months of January through March behind us, and it's impossible to make up the difference. Our current 2013 budget is $556,000 short of this ratio. The district did not make the forecasted production numbers during the year as well, and the district faced many extraordinary startup costs at the powerhouse, mostly relating to emissions. We've talked to Howard Barnes with regards to what impact will this have on Rust by not making the first year's tier ratio, and he stated that as long as we have a plan in order to make that ratio in the future, that there is some understanding on new districts as far as making it, especially when the loan wasn't given until midway through the year. In order to enact a rate increase, we need to call a public hearing and then pass an ordinance which goes into effect 30 days later. The increase would not go into effect until September 1st. With the slow months of September through November, there's not enough time or production to make up the difference in this calendar year. It is staff's recommendation to request that the board on July 7th call for a public hearing to discuss an increase for the next meeting on August 10th. This increase, if it was to cover the entire amount needed, would be 9% and be enough to cover the 1.05 tier for fiscal 2014. The 2014-15 budget would be structured to also meet this tier ratio. This increase compares to the 3.1% increase in Howard's financial forecast. This issue was discussed at length at the Finance Committee, and the thought of subsidizing electric rates with property taxes was discussed. As mentioned, the amount of the shortfall for the 2013-14 budget year is $431,000. I think we forwarded a spreadsheet showing the effects of the rates on utilizing a portion of property taxes. And is that...
Was that a spreadsheet was sent out?
Oh, here it is, right here. Yeah. I apologize for this delay.
So,
Well, time delay.
yeah, why don't we just take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, that's all right.
Sure.
Apologize again for that pause. So as mentioned, the amount of the shortfall for the 2014 budget this is what we're forecasting, is $431,000. So what we've passed out is the effects of using a certain amount of property taxes if we subsidize the electric rates by $100,000 or $200,000 in property taxes. The rate increase that we're talking about is 9% for the overall rate increase. If we added $100,000 allocated to electric, this increase would be 331, and would drop the rate increase to a 7% overall rate increase. At a $200,000 allocation, that increase would be 4%. It is staff's recommendation that the board call a public hearing for August 10th, review this information, and then make their final decision at that meeting after public input.
Should there be discussion now, or should the discussion wait for the public hearing?
It can be both. This is a properly agendized item, so.
Okay. I'd like to hear what the Finance Committee's thoughts were on this.
So let me start with the big picture, because I think we'll need to explain this to the community. Is normally we would do a budget to say our goal is to break even at the end of the year approximately, so we have cost match revenues. So the tier ratio of 1.5 says you actually you make more money than you need to cover expenses. So that accumulates cash. Eventually we take that cash and we use it to lower rates by paying down debt.
Right.
So that's the actual thing that's going on. So that is our obligation, and our demonstration of meeting our obligation is our sign of good faith to the Rural Utility Service and the bank. In terms, so that makes a fairly large rate increase compared to what we've done. So that's why we thought it would be prudent to look at, are there ways of buffering the rate increase? I mean, eventually it has to get there, but should we buffer it a little bit? And I think that's a good thing to at least discuss. The other thing we discussed that isn't on this chart that I'll ask you about is the meter charge, although it's not the biggest part of your bill, was based on a higher interest rate assumption, and whether we would reevaluate whether the meter charge accurately reflects our costs, or there's an opportunity there. And I don't know if you want to comment on that or not.
Yeah, it was our intent to take a look at the meter charge.
Right.
Of course, the interest rate is a 35-year, and it was the intent for the meter charge to only last 10 years. So
it may not be any difference. Right. Yeah, but we would take a look at that. So that's why we thought it would be a good idea to consider buffering the rate increase to smooth it out over over 2 years.
And I think the other aspect which Michael mentioned of this is that we're not spreading our costs as widely as over as many kilowatt hours as we thought we might. That was in Howard Barnes's forecast, right? And I think this has always been a concern. Were we being overly optimistic or realistic about how much demand there would be for electricity?
Well, that may come up in the budget discussion, but
Yeah.
we were pretty close to 6.8 million.
We're 6.7, I think.
Yeah.
But I think, if I may be wrong, but I think that the 6.8 million was for the previous year.
Okay. Well,
I may be wrong about that.
No, you're absolutely correct. So
it
Howard
had
budgeted
increased
this
its-
year for 6.9, and we're going to make 6.7 or whatever it is. And then
Right.
next year, it's additional upon that. Howard's budget went up to 7 point something, and we're forecasting about 6.9.
Yeah, so it's a couple 100,000 kilowatt hours is all I'm saying. That
Yeah. So that's
that
a
is the other
significant
factor.
as well.
Yeah, that there's another factor here.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And if although this may be more appropriate for the budget conversation, but the other thing we would look at is, so obviously this was a weak snow season.
Right.
So where did that lower demand? Because the lifts ran anyway, right, to take you up to rocky areas or whatever they were doing. So the demand drop would have been in commercial and residential and part of this we take a look and say, well,
Right.
in a more robust snow season, what would that change be in commercial and residential? And does that account for it? Because we're not getting anything from new hookups, obviously. So that would be the other thing that we would want to look at.
And the other thing that I would like to look at is what our projected cash, operating cash will be at the end of the current fiscal year. I mean, I know in the cash waterfall now it's $3 million or a little more. And the question is that where we want to be? Is it too much? Is it too little? And do we have some slack there or not? Basically, to use some property taxes because we'll have cash to cover
Right.
things.
Right.
I mean, special districts, which we are, can get into a habit of getting too rich. I mean, we're not in that situation by far, but you can get into that habit, and I don't want to get into that habit. I want to always be lean, but wisely lean, I guess you might say.
A couple other comments. One is the accumulation of cash not only lowers the rate eventually, but it is intended to pay for some of the Out Valley costs.
Right.
The entire Out Valley total package is $52 million, and we forecasted that we would use cash for $2 million of the total amount. Secondly, that the property taxes, we have pledged to cover COP debt service as well. It doesn't mean that cash is cash and we can just leave it in the bank and say that we're covering that debt service in that fashion. Yeah, and so when we do publish, if the board decides to publish a public notice hearing, we would put out the variable rate that we would be discussing here as reflected on this form, and allow the public to know what we're talking about, and also give you the opportunity to reflect those rates however you deem necessary.
In other words, we have to give them three options. We would have to tell them that we're considering 3 options.
Yes.
Okay, any comments, questions from the audience on the matter of calling a public hearing for electric rate increase? Electric and propane rate increases, right?
Just electric.
Just electric. Any more questions from the board?
Yeah, I'd sort of like to understand what the first con means, and I guess I don't understand it. It says that we've pledged property taxes to ensure coverage of COP debt service. So how does that interact with this if we try to use property taxes to prevent the increase being larger than it would otherwise be? Can we do that? Are we only at risk of having to go back to do something else to cover COP debt service if we've used the cash to buffer rate increases?
In the COP covenants, we've stated that if we don't pay actually how it works is that we take property taxes and we pay for our debt service out of property taxes, and then we replenish that with revenues through the water and wastewater and the affected propane water and wastewater, which is affected by the COPs. Yes, you can do that. It's just an allocation of your cash on when you receive those dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So we have pledged property taxes to another fund, and we would need to, if water and wastewater couldn't make their debt service payments, we would have to use property taxes in order to do so. We've pledged up to, of the $842,000 that we received from property taxes, we pledged approximately $267, I believe, for COP debt service.
Okay, so there's headroom still available beyond what was pledged for COP debt service. So Bob, you described the use of property taxes as a way to buffer the rate increase, and I'd like to understand that a little better. If you did use no property taxes, we'd have to raise electric rates by 9%.
Yeah, I mean, we need to verify all the math, but
Yeah.
that's probably where we are at the
But in
moment.
the big picture...
And that's the base rate, right? You still have the variable
Yeah.
on top of that to deal with.
So was your thought there that it was awkward to increase it by, I mean, obviously it's awkward to increase it by 9%, but that it would be awkward in the sense that you would be raising it by 9% in order to meet the 1.05 coverage ratio in the short term, but then we would be reducing it potentially back to 5% later on. Is that what the big picture would look like? And you're just trying to avoid a bump at the beginning of the process because we're getting in compliance with Russ?
Yeah, I wanted to consider the rate increase occurring across 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more gradual.
But would you envision it ultimately getting to 9% above what the rates are now? In order to
I haven't done the math,
Yeah.
but let's assume that it needs to get to 9% without imposing a subsidy.
Well,
But I don't know I haven't done the math myself, so I
Yeah,
don't
but
know the answer
but
to
that's
that.
why it seems kind of awkward. I mean, if you imagine us explaining this to the community, and we're saying that we have a new requirement, and the new requirement is a 1.05 ratio coverage to RUS. That's what we've agreed to do with Russ. Then, you know, the logical reaction to that is, oh, okay, I understand that, and then so I'm going to expect to see my rates go up by 5%. Why? What are we going to explain to the public about why it has to go up to by 9% instead of 5%? What's the simple explanation for that?
Okay, well, I wasn't really prepared to do all this at this meeting.
That's
I
fine,
would be
but that's-
prepared by the next meeting.
Yeah, that's.
But most people are just going to look at their monthly bill and say, has the district done everything they can to keep rates down?
Mhm.
So the answer to that is we potentially could have rates be lower by using some property tax. And did we consider that and reject it, or consider it and accept it, or did we not even consider it at all? I think it's prudent on our part to do everything we possibly can to keep rates down, and this is a possible option,
Yeah.
even though they may have to go up in subsequent years, although they might not, depending on demand.
Yeah.
Right?
Clear.
That's really the variable.
Yeah. Thank you.
So
And-
that's the logic, but until we do the math, I'm not prepared to
Mhm.
say where I would even fall
Yeah.
on that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be useful for the purpose of the hearing to go back to Howard Barnes' graphs, which always showed a spike in 2014, 2015. And the spike was because of the tier ratio, it was because of new assets coming online and new depreciation costs that we had to cover. I think some expensing some items associated with the powerhouse. I'm not quite sure all the items, but remember that graph, it spikes significantly and that starts coming down. And what I want to understand better is how far within or outside of those bounds are we, and the major reasons why. If we're out of bounds, why? And I think
Right.
the thing that I think is going to be is we're not consuming as much electricity as we thought we would. So certain of our costs aren't getting amortized more broadly.
Yeah, the spike is in 2015, and that's because we don't, until construction is complete, we don't have our full debt service.
Right.
So this is not the last, this is not the peak.
This is
We're
not.
This is not the peak, but I want to
This
know
is a path
where-
to something very,
Where on the
expensive.
slope are we is what I'd like to understand better.
Yeah.
Alan has a question.
Alan?
Just one more comment to add to this. I would encourage the board to call for a rate hearing next meeting, but I would also encourage you to think about really considering using as much property tax subsidy as possible, because if that spike goes up, the higher we raise rates, the more resistant consumers are going to be to using electricity. And I think we're right there at that point. We're seeing less usage of electricity because rates are so high.
We just put in an LED lighting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that all over the valley right now, so, you know, that's
right, Daddy. Let's just
see it.
One other comment is that as we get better in it, Brandy gets better at running the powerhouse, and as these one-time costs of operations, costs are seen, like passing and getting our permit and such, those costs won't be repeated in the future. It may be prudent for the board to use property taxes for the short term and see how costs are contained on the far term.
Okay, do I have a motion to call for a public hearing for electric rate increase discussion on August 10th.
I will so move.
And I will second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we move to item 8J, review and possible approval of resolution approving the district's 2013-2014 financial budget.
Before you today is the total package. This has been sent out to the Finance Committee and the board just recently. We are not looking for acceptance today. We're just looking for review. And we would propose that this be considered for review at the August 10th meeting when Treasurer O'Grady returns. So today before you is the balance sheet and the income statements, and Jill is here to give a presentation.
Hi, Jill.
As Michael said, before the board is the latest edition of the 2013-14 budget package. In this edition, balance sheets have been added, and there have been some updates to the income statements. As far as the income statements changes made, the 2013 forecast numbers have been updated with May actuals. So it's just, it's through May, and then we have June projections. G&A expenses on the summary sheets have been moved up to be included with operating expenses. Titles have been changed to a more standard format. The proposed electric rate increase to meet the rust-tier ratio is included in this budget. Based on Howard Barnes' financial forecast, a 2% load growth increase has been included in the electric department, and no load growth has been forecasted in the other departments. For the fiscal year, we're anticipating a net loss of $471,000 compared to the budget of $255,000. This is due to a slow year and lack of snowfall, and unanticipated emission costs and other startup costs with the powerhouse. Next year, we're projecting a net loss of $47,432. That's due to the rate increase in electric being included in this budget, and the reduction in interest expense due to the capitalization of the interest on the Out Valley project. Those are the changes on the income statement. Also included are balance sheets. The first is the quarterly consolidated balance sheet. The first line item on the balance sheets is operating funds. There's a change in the 2013 actual forecast. There's a line item a little further down called Reserve Rate Stabilization Fund. As of June 30th, that balance is $3.2 million. That's what we're calling reserve now. We eliminated rate stabilization. So in the fiscal year 2014 budget, that line item is zero, and that amount has been added into the first item, operating funds. So operating funds are showing not only operating cash, but a 3.2 stable reserve fund balance throughout the year. In restricted funds, basically that's the largest part of that is our RUS funds that we're receiving. We're listing that under restricted. And showing on the second page of the quarterly consolidated balance sheets under non-current liabilities, under long-term debt, that is our RUS fund liability. As of June 30th, 2014, we're projecting the liability to be $48.4 million. That's based on Michelle Gamble's work with monthly draws.
So we took the forecast that we produced, the monthly forecast, to come up with those liabilities.
Where's the $48 million show up?
It's under non-current liabilities, under long-term debt, less current portion. It's on the second page of the quarterly consolidated.
The last column, June 30th.
Okay, I must not have the most recent.
Yeah, it's page 3.
Oh, okay, got it, sorry. I thought you said 2013, sorry.
Are there any questions?
Well, I would like to maybe ask the finance, Bob Epstein and Alan for the finance committee, what the philosophy is for moving what we had called the rate stabilization fund into operating, and whether or not are any thoughts about having a rate stabilization fund, which I think the purpose of that was to stabilize rates. That if we had low snow years, we could use something and not have to go for rate increases automatically.
So it's in this format. This is the same format that the board approved last year. We use the same thing for simplicity. We actually haven't moved it into our operating funds. It's segregated into a separate account. It's just commingled in this. In the cash waterfall that Jill will present during her report, that actually shows just the operating funds.
But I guess my question is that if, as of the end of this fiscal year, it's projected to be $3.2 million, and we have a short, maybe I'm just not understanding something, and we're short $422,000. That can't come out of the 3.2 million, and I mean, can you explain that?
Well, I don't believe it can, because the tier ratio says that you have revenues of 105% of your expenses, including depreciation. And so a revenue isn't moving your balance sheet.
But revenue is from property taxes, right?
That's right.
So, well, okay, so let me just restate it then. If we took $200,000 from property taxes, took cash from the rate stabilization fund and moved it, I mean, you know, it's musical chairs, so you are using revenues. But the net effect is the rate stabilization fund is there, I think, just for this purpose.
That's why I believe we can make this work and make everybody happy. Yeah.
Got it.
but I'm new to this, so
And-
we want trust but verify.
And the dollar amount doesn't have to be the $100,000 or $200,000. It could be a $422,000 or whatever the shortfall is. You don't have to limit it. We used two examples, but it could be a $300,000 subsidy or a $400,000 subsidy, whatever the finance committee and the board feels comfortable with as far as a subsidy to meet those tier ratios.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is, and I like the way the finance committee is working, and so you set certain basic principles, and then you work to those principles. Well, in the budgeting, I mean, I'd like to establish a principle that here's how much cash we want on hand, you know, at any given time,
Right.
so we can cover emergencies or cover, you know, unexpected shortfalls and so on. And beyond that, I want to be very careful about accumulating cash. That's what I mean by getting, quote, too rich, unquote.
Yeah, so in terms of operating cash, the general thing I think we're working towards is we always have 3 months operating cash,
About
and the
2
3 months is the most expensive months.
Right.
So if you consider that to be January through March, the likely cash outflow for operation costs is the target cash on hand.
Okay.
To have.
So that could...
That's kind of
Yeah.
what we've discussed. We haven't necessarily adopted that as policy.
Okay.
Then you have the cash that's accumulating from rates that are above 100% of costs, and that cash goes to pay down debt.
Right.
Or cover extraordinary, and if we have a unexpected capital expense, we don't have to go out and borrow. We have it there to cover.
So I think that's terrific. I mean, I completely agree with that. So when we, at the public hearing, I'd like sort of an expression of that and saying, therefore, we have this or we don't have this in the property tax to use.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alan?
Just in regards to your getting too rich comment, I won't be worried about that until November of 2014, when we see the final bills come in and we realize we don't have to borrow that last $3 million from Wes, we can pay out in cash.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, we're close to being that.
So,
It is something that special
but
districts
having a
do
lot of
from
cash
time
on the
to
balance
time.
sheet for the next year
Yeah.
or so is not a bad thing.
I'm delighted with the point where you can worry about us having too much
Yeah.
cash, so that makes me very happy.
It's a new experience.
Yeah, and hopefully it won't be a long-term experience.
Yeah.
I have a couple comments on the budget. That I think, first of all, I think the numbers are right, and I've been through them all, and we've worked on them for a while. But the philosophy of the budget, I think, needs to be written down. And so there's a couple of things about this budget that they don't concern me, but they're inconsistencies. And that is that we're projecting flat usage in water, sewage, and or wastewater and propane. Yet the only way electricity can go up is if homeowners and residents and commercial are here more this next season than last. If they are, they're likely to flush the toilet more. I mean, so the usage of electricity, propane, and water are likely, on residential and commercial, are likely to all go up or go down, not one go up and the others stay flat. So I feel like what we've done with the budget is we've done the Russ modeling for electricity, but haven't applied it to the others. In some sense, that's conservative.
Yeah.
But when we try to analyze a year from now how we did versus budget, I feel like we need to document what our assumptions are and what decisions we made and how those are reflected in there. But I don't feel that needs to be done prior to approving the budget. So that's my main request within this, as well as having usage for all utilities, not just electricity and propane. So we know what number we're targeting. I also think it's good to always operate under a budget. So I would like to at least raise the question why we're now in the next fiscal year. These numbers appear right to me. Why do we need to operate without a budget for a month? What's the thinking behind waiting another month and operating without a budget as opposed to approving the budget?
I can address that.
Okay.
District staff is comfortable with the numbers, as is Director Epstein, and it was only for respect for the board to review and the Finance Committee to review that I recommended that we postpone till August 10th. But I agree, we are comfortable with these numbers. We've worked very hard with the Treasurer and the Finance Committee to get these numbers right. So we have no problems with approving the budget at this point.
Does Standish particularly want to be involved in that approval? I mean, explicitly?
No.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to, I mean, I've reviewed the numbers and I don't see anything that I would change, I don't believe.
I mean, what I look for is to try to have some sense, do we have the proper amount of cash, and are we authorizing expenses carefully?
Yeah.
The unknowns in next year are not the expenses in this budget, it's the revenues, which are very dependent on what the ski season is going to be. But if we knew it's going to be worse, there might be expenses that we might defer later in this year, but we would probably still start with this as the starting point, because expenses are minimal changes over our first full year of experience. And revenues are, you might argue, are conservative for certain utilities and a little bit more aggressive for others. So maybe they'll balance out, or maybe we'll learn something. But I wouldn't propose changing any number.
Michael, can you remind me, I'm sorry, I'm not clear, where are we on the water and wastewater rate increases?
Sure, we're completing the rate study for those, and we hope to bring that to the board to call a public hearing for, it would go before the board on August 10th, call a public hearing. I think it's 45 days later. This is a 218 process.
Right.
So that would hit the October meeting for possible inaction. And it would go into effect 30 days later.
So whereas the budget does assume an increase in the electric rates, it does not assume increases in water and wastewater rates, right?
That is correct. Since it's just a vote of the board to approve an electric rate increase, and these numbers would work whether you subsidized with property taxes or not. It would just change the cash. it does not assume a vote of the public.
Okay, well, I'd certainly be happy simply to go ahead and approve the budget if staff and the finance committee would recommend that.
Just one question, I guess. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this budgeting process was done on an Excel spreadsheet separate from our accounting system. And one of the concerns Standish has had was with the accuracy of the roll-ups within this Excel spreadsheet. But if we're comfortable with the departmental numbers, those departmental numbers get entered into our accounting system so that the roll-up is not directly connected. So I'd be very comfortable with moving forward with this budget.
Yes, and I think we've addressed those issues that were a concern with this addition.
But yes.
So in terms of the finance committee, the budget has been reviewed over the last 2 meetings, and changes have been requested, and they've all been reflected. I can't represent the whole committee, but I can say that I feel these are the right ones to proceed with. And I guess Alan is the other member present. So I think it's the general sense of the committee that we're in the right, that these are approximately right, and we're in a better place to understand them than we have been in the past.
From staff's perspective, Joe, are you okay with approval today?
Yes.
Okay, then I'd like to...
I would ask that the board go ahead and approve by motion, but then come back to this item because we're drawing up a resolution, which this needs to be done by
that's where
resolution.
Reno went? So shall we simply
2014, 2011?
defer this till a little later in the meeting?
You can either approve by motion, but you will need to come back and read a motion into the minutes.
Well,
Read a
we'll
resolution.
let's just wait for the resolution.
It's going to be Resolution 1311, isn't it? So the last resolution was 1310.
Yeah. Well, no, she might have.
Might
See,
put a
I already
different
drew
number
it
on it.
up, so it'll just be a minute.
Yeah. Well, why don't we move on to the manager's reports then? Excuse me, I should stop for a moment and ask if there's any other questions from the public on the budget as we've been discussing it.
When
Carolyn?
you said you were going to have a rate increase hearing, do you mean on August 10th, or you're going to post the notice on August 10th?
The public hearing for the electric rate increase would be on August 10th.
Okay.
Yes. Oh. It's great to have a clerk of the board who knows how to do resolutions. Thank you.
13.9.
Yeah, 1311 was, who knows what that would have been, yeah. Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve Resolution 13-09. A resolution of the...
I'll move that we adopt Resolution 13-09.
Which is a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District adopting the fiscal year 2013-2014 financial plan as submitted by staff at this meeting, July 7th. I'll second that motion. All in favor?
I just want to add that my request would be that we put together a narrative that explains the budget rationale and have that available for the next board meeting. But that would define our thought process behind these numbers, the major areas, so we have a way of comparing a year from now.
Okay, so we should have that to be a specific agenda item, which is the narrative
Yeah.
of the
But
budget.
as long as that's understood, then I'm fine with the resolution.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'd be record for the budget being in place at the earliest point.
Now we've got to change the goal achievement by Michael a little bit. Gee. Because I thought that was going to be in August.
It's after the start of the fiscal year.
Yeah, that's just-
You got an
that's
improved
true.
opportunity
We're
to-
already
That's
starting.
true.
We're already starting.
That's true. Okay, thank you for that. Let's move to agenda item 9, manager reports. 9A is the general manager's report.
I have positive news. Our propane service and supply deliverer, Kiva Energy, actually found a mistake in their accounting records. They did have a laid-in cost, and they found that their laid-in cost, they'd been overcharging the district and showed us the numbers and issued a $35,000 check. So it's very honest, very, stepping up. They've also produced a really good service. They're the ones that are recommending the 6-inch tie-in here for the Loop Road project, and I can't say enough about that kind of business etiquette that they've shown. So
That's great.
That just reminds me of one other thing before I forget. We also have carbon emission allowances in our account that presumably they canceled the last auction from lack of interest, but presumably that is also to be considered into the rate analysis.
Right. Do you want to give a quick update? We are applying for or is it the August? October now?
Auction. We are applying for it. The revenues that we will receive, we've talked to our legal counsel for regulatory affairs about how we can use those proceeds, and we are considering bringing before the board the option to buy renewable portfolio standard compliance targets with that, and with the additional to be either credited back to customers or put into an account for future purchases.
I'm just requesting that one more factor to be considered in the rate case. It's about $50,000 the going rate right at the moment.
Significant.
Yeah. It's a penny.
The July newsletter went out. It discusses the construction of the volcano outages that I've discussed, the rates, also the notice of election. We will have a period of declaration of candidacy from July 15th through August 9th. This will be the first time that we've ever had at-large voting if we actually have an election. Bob Epstein, Peter Dornbrook, and Eric Rickard are up for election, and we have put the notices out throughout the community and mentioned them during my presentations. We had a meeting with EID, El Dorado Irrigation District, with regards to the water rights issue. As you remember, it was the board's direction for staff to go out and just get a feeling of the waters, see what our stakeholders' interests were. I met with Jim Abercrombie and Tom Cumpston from EID. Very positive meeting. They had no issue with our obtaining water rights. The only issue they have is that we would need to, as per agreement, we would need to reimburse them for any lost hydroelectric revenues that they would have from our 200 feet of usage that would not go, would be available for them to make power with. This would be a very minimal cost as far as.
Is that theoretical revenue, or do they actually have a generator?
They have
generation at a lower reservoir.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it would be the lost water downstream at their. They have a hydroelectric plant. I don't know exactly where it is. Okay. I do have that. So
Is that
Below Slide Park?
Yes.
That's the only other lake they've got.
I think it's below Slide Park. Do they have a formula that?
Yes, actually they do, and the Vail actually pays them now for part of the snowmaking contract. They paid EID for the entire amount of their permit of lost revenues, and Vail is working on reducing that amount to the actual usage of
They've
water.
never used their full thing.
Right.
Not close.
Yeah, so they're trying to reduce that down, but to us, this could mean it could be right around less than $5,000 a year. So this is not a large issue. Next step on the water study is to receive a proposal from a water rights engineer to actually file for rights and complete the team of staff, Shanahan and Matt Wheeler. Matt Wheeler would be the engineer that actually comes up with the physical improvements. The water rights engineer is somebody that's experienced in filing these specific types of requests and permits. So that'll come back before the board. On pages 163 and 164 is a district engineer update. The membranes are still on track for a August delivery and installation before the November, and the well 4 and 5 upgrades have produced up to 134 gallons per minute flow. So from getting 100 to 134 is a good first step. So we are making inroads there. We have had meetings with Dennis DeCure and Dick Shanahan with regards to our power purchase agreements. Dennis DeCure is the lawyer that we've retained to look at the agreements with Shell. He'll be coming back with a proposal to the board on what it'll take to finalize those agreements. Those are non-binding power purchase agreements. Future agenda titles for the August meeting, besides those discussed today, we'll be talking about out valley contracts. The most important would be the overhead construction. Of course, we'll have the electric public hearing. We should be able to bring before the board a proposal for the cafeteria plan for our health benefits. We'll update the board on our power purchase. We will come before the board with a recap and a recommendation for refunds for the snow removal contracts and the actual contract amounts for next year. We'll have a diesel cost recap showing what our costs and our production and and what we were able to do throughout the year through the powerhouse. We'll have a year-end financial recap, and possibly we'll be presenting the Melrose information. So another packed agenda. And that's the end of the manager's report.
Thank you. Any questions of Michael from the audience on any item? Okay. We move to 9B, operations report, summer construction. Hello, Rick.
Morning.
Good event yesterday.
Thank you. My report will be brief today, and I guess I should start off, with the barbecue. I just want to say thank you to all the homeowners as well as the board for allowing us to have another great event. We'll be working with staff as well as the community to try to figure out where the shortcomings were, but also what the home runs were. I think the shrimp was a home run, so I heard a lot of good things about the shrimp. But hopefully with the help with the ad hoc committee, which I want to make a special thank you to Ann O'Grady, Carolyn Scott, Cheryl Stern, Sandy Goldberg, Maylene Smith, and Diane Rupp-Alexander for all their hard work making this a successful event, I hope. We'll be bringing back to the board kind of a recap of the event. Hopefully, maybe not the next board meeting, but the one after that, to give you the rundown exactly how it went down. How many people attended, which we're thinking over 400, maybe 450, and of course the revenue side. So again, thanks to everyone. As we move forward, we'll be ready for the Death Ride event, which is next Saturday, and we're still looking for volunteers for that. So if anybody would like to call me, I'll put you on the list, or just show up. We generally will start the rest station at Carson Pass around noon, and it'll go to about 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. And this is also a fundraising activity for the fire department. We get a donation from the Alpine County Chamber of Commerce to sponsor the Carson Pass rest stop. So if anybody's interested in helping us out, we would appreciate the help. And then for the summer projects, I have updated the board with the current summer project list, and I'll be working with General Manager Sharp to prioritize the projects for July. But know that we're going to focus the concentration of staff time on some of the electrical issues, for example, closing the commercial loop, buttoning up the Palisades project, which we're about 90% complete. We just have to fill the hole, and then moving forward into the bridge project, which I think we'll resolve some issues there, doing some exploratory digging on that. And then finally for summer projects, which I should note is the membranes are coming, so we're preparing for that, and it seems like each week we get more and more requests from the contractors, Auburn constructors who are doing the work for us to figure out how this is going to work, where we're going to stage the membranes once they arrive, and get them up and running. So going to be a busy July and August, and if there's any questions from the board on that, on the summer projects calendar, please let me know.
Any questions? So the Loop Road project likely will not happen this summer, right? The electric or the propane?
Depends on how our luck with the other top 4 projects. I think Brandy will mention some of that in
Okay.
her report.
Thank you. And
Yes,
thanks
sir.
again for a great event, and thank you to the ad hoc committee as well. It's really I think it's the best one I've been to.
Well, very good, and thank you again for all your help. I know all the board members are out there working hard, and it was just a nice day, except that we almost tried to kill Carolyn with the tent
The
again.
wind, yeah.
It seems like every year that when the tent blows, it's around her. So next time we'll put the fire truck up there and tie it to the truck or something. But thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
And Rick was late because he was attending the President's Council of the KCA meeting
All right.
on the district's behalf. So thank you, Rick, for
Thanks, Rick.
attending that as well.
Okay, we go to 9C, electric and propane systems. Brandy.
Good morning. So I have an update on our electric distribution as well as a brief update on the powerhouse and the Met Tower. Before you is a map of our electric distribution system, and our top project, which is actually happening next week, is the looping of the commercial core system. So from the vaults at the old powerhouse, you actually see a pink line running down to Red Cliffs Lodge. That line is currently not connected. So I hope everyone has seen the outage notice. It's on page 179 of your packet. On Tuesday, we will actually be shutting down the entire distribution system so that we can get into those vaults and reconnect that line. We've hired a core driller. We'll have to drill between some of the vaults that have the different circuits in it, which is necessitating the longer power outage. But that will give us a loop on our commercial core system so that we will be feeding both behind in the meadow from the Red Cliff side and on that direct berry line through Kirkwood Meadows Drive. We did coordinate with the resort, and we ended up moving our time back an hour to allow them to complete one of their pre-scheduled meetings, so we are coordinated with them. And as Rick mentioned, we are going to focus on the bridge project next. It is going to necessitate digging, and that is on the map here between the vaults underneath the towers and the vaults over by Lift 1. So we have that line that is underneath the bridge that we need to determine where both ends are and either remove it if it is not currently powering anything or relocate it so that it's not hanging off that bridge. In additional electric distribution projects, we have the Palisades project, which we are almost complete with. We have some exploratory research that needs to be done to tell if the rest of the lots on the high side of the road have usable conduit or if we are going to have to do further work to get power up to those lots. And the CPUC electric distribution project, which is also included in your board packet on page 184. We are regulated under their safety program, and we've been asked to institute this General Order 165 record keeping and inspection program. So this is our first annual report that we have submitted to the CPUC. It summarizes what inspections we do internally and what services we have performed for us, what we were able to get completed and what we were not able to get completed.
And since this was a new program for the district, we were not able to complete all of the repairs on our list last year. We found 37 items that needed to be repaired, and our inspections were done in late October and November. So we were able to get some of the items repaired before December 31st. The rest remain on our list for this year. And it will be a focus as soon as the vault project is completed and the Out Valley dig on Kirkwood Meadows Drive is completed, to finish these outstanding maintenance items. Moving on to the powerhouse. We had, yesterday, we had some tours. We were not sure what the public interest would be on tours since it's the second year of operation, but we actually had 28 people come through, so a pretty good turnout. Everyone's asked interesting questions. It was a good time, I believe, by all. And the other item on the powerhouse is a summary of our average usage, or our average production kilowatt hours per gallon. And Michael had asked us to put together a year's worth of this data and talk about the highs and lows and how we can improve in next year. So what we have is a yearly average of 13.73 kilowatt hours per gallon. Our highest month was actually July of 2012, which was right after the Volvos were brought back in service after their replacement of their radiators. We had several items that throughout the year did not allow us to run the Volvos as much as we had hoped we would be able to. We had the fuel problem system where we couldn't keep pressure in the line. We had coolant breaker relay issues and ammonia leaks on the stack. So we hope that by correcting those items, we'll be able to use the Volvos more in the future and increase our kilowatt hour per gallon production over this 13.73. And the additional item, which was repeated twice, was the emissions testing, the RADA, where we had to rent the load banks and we were producing power up against the load banks that wasn't going out into the grid. So we're still working with Great Basin on whether or not we will have to repeat the entire test with the load bank or whether they will let us do a less intense option. But we're very hopeful that at most we would have to do one RADA test this next year.
Do they realize that we're producing the emissions that they want us to not produce by running these tests?
That is a good point.
What was your high number?
We actually got above 14 to 14.66 in July of 2012. As far as propane goes, we have a leak survey that is scheduled for this month. You will probably see Kiva Energy out. They're going to go along the whole line with equipment and check for leaks along the line. It's a CPUC requirement. We have to do it every 5 years. This is our first shot at that as well. And then lastly, I wanted to give you an update on the Met Tower. We did get our special design completed through Roan Towers. Included in your packet, page 81 and 82 are the pertinent pages from that design. And I'm happy to report there is a tower that will meet the Amador County ice load and wind load requirements. It is not, unfortunately, the tower that we have. So we are working with Roan Towers to return that tower. They are going to accept the return and be able to ship us this new tower. We expect that the new tower will cost approximately $3,000. And we will have to get an upgraded rail bracket and carriage assembly for the hand-operated elevator that the equipment will be mounted to. This comes from Tower Systems Incorporated. The proposal is in your packet for a cost of $1,615. And we will receive a credit from them as well because we had ordered the less robust model for the previous tower at a cost of about $1,000. So we'll recap some of that.
Is this a better deal for us in the sense that you can crank down the instruments now? And on the old one, I think, Michael, what you told me was that if someone wrong with one of the instruments, you had to tilt the tower down to get at this stuff. Is that true? Or?
That was an old design. The one that we finally ended up ordered was the...
So it'll be a very similar setup, just robust enough to handle the requirements from Amador County. So we will be going down tomorrow with the stamped drawings for the building department, and we will have building permit in hand before receiving new equipment.
The design that was not adequate?
The design came from Great Basin, which is our permitting authority.
Right. So they gave us the wrong.
But it, in their defense, if anyone remembers at the bottom of Powerhouse Road where an old Met Tower stood, it was the same tower. But that was a different county than where we were placing it over here. So.
Randy, going back to the Powerhouse, there are two issues that Al Graff has brought to me, which I know he's brought to you as well. But regarding the Powerhouse, he showed me, he was here briefly for a little while this morning. He showed some huge frequency variations that occurred, I think, on the 3rd of July. And he's wondering what that was all about. Do you know right offhand what that's all about?
I don't know. I did see his email this morning, and I will look into it, and I can get back to him and the board with.
And he
what
also
that
had,
was.
I think, another full day of weird variations.
Right. So I'll take a look at that, but I don't know off the top of my head.
And the other is, I know that he's written long emails and detailed emails about how he's being charged for the solar system. I mean, the net generation. I'd just like to suggest that rather than series of serial emails and me getting stuff, I now have a letter that, you know, I know I'll understand the letter, but I won't understand why. Could we just have a meeting between you, Michael, if Michael would like, Al and me, whether it's a phone meeting or an in-person meeting? Let's just get it straight. Because I'm very confused by it, because I know we as a board put off approving the ordinance until he had thoroughly reviewed it. And I thought he had. And I thought what we approved was realistic in terms of not only frequency generations, but also how he and, of course, Raging Fellows would be billed, and how the net would be calculated and paid either monthly or annually. I thought we were all squared away, and apparently we're not. So I'd like to understand that.
I'd like to request that we have a initial discussion before that meeting is called, so that we can make sure that we establish district direction.
Sure. Yeah, no, I just want to understand I mean, I don't necessarily want to be the person to resolve it. I don't need to be, except that I've been pulled into it, so. And I'm happy to participate in it.
I'd like to back up for just a second. You described it as once every 5-year process. You were going to go through looking for propane leaks.
Yes.
The operations committee certainly would like to get a run through of what you found, because we've focused, as you're aware, on efficiency of each of our revenue businesses, and here's something that's significant to propane if perhaps we found any places where stuff's leaking out instead of getting to a meter. So I think a pretty careful run through that at the operations committee after you make some field observations. That'd be really interesting stuff. So.
Okay.
I had one item. We do an annual water quality report on that. I think we should think about what sort of reports we would do on the electricity power, which would a minimum would include uptime against goals, how we're doing there. I mean, I think most people anecdotally know that this was a good year for reliability, but we don't have it but we don't publish any data. So I'd like you to think about what we might do based on data that you already collect, and to the degree with which it's understandable, whether we're within range on harmonic distortion and other things. So that way we can demonstrate improvement. So I'd like to ask you to think about what makes sense. And then on the propane, they also check the houses, because I know when PG&E did it, they detected that I had a leak in the fitting coming into my house. So it's beyond just savings in that it's looking for hazards. Yeah, well, I meant in Berkeley.
Any other questions of Brandy?
Do you have an analogous process here?
Well, that's what the CPUC.
So you're going to go all the way to
that's the
in
equipment
residence.
senses the molecules in the air, and then you track where they're coming from. So it's incredibly sensitive.
Do we know if we have a disconnect between the amount of propane we buy and the amount we sell? Is it a significant number?
We've got this little spreadsheet we're looking at in the operations committee. I think that's probably the one that we have the least understanding of so far. So I think this is just a good opportunity to see if we can close the gap between what we delivered into the head of the pipe and what got metered at the household.
Well, there's we feel those numbers are pretty close, but there's a lot of variables in those numbers since we buy propane in gallonage and we sell it through cubic foot, and there's a conversion process that also involves temperature. So whenever you add temperature into a conversion process, it gets a little. We don't feel that there is no gushing leak out there, but there's potential, and that's why we promoted doing this leak detection.
And Brandy, congratulations on your certificate of completion.
Oh, thank you. That should help us with our load bank as well.
Yeah.
Hopefully we will be able to eliminate that from our testing. Thank you.
Yeah, so the board members that don't know, Brandy took an entire week and went to Colorado, not the pretty part of Colorado, and spent a week listening about switchgear and computers and things like that, but she now knows how to control our EasyJets.
I do.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. Now we have the administrative report. Joe.
I believe on Friday, May financials were sent as a supplemental to the packet. So I'm going to start with that. The first page of that is the balance sheet. And just want to note that on this balance sheet, our funds are broken down more than in the budget balance sheet. So this is hopefully a little easier to understand. As of the end of May, our total operating cash was $2,274,000. This is down $183,000 from plan, primarily due to April revenues being down. Also listed on here is our total reserve. Again, that's at $3.2 million, and that's staying stable. Our total trustee special construction, that's our RUS funds that we have in the bank currently. Everything on the balance sheet is pretty stable unless there's any questions on those. I'll go into the income statements. May was another rough year for revenues. Our total revenues for May was $403,000. That's down $145,000 from plan, primarily in electric and propane. Our May net loss is $155,000, which is $88,000 higher than plan. Our total year-to-date net loss is $271,000, which is $171,000 over plan. And some just individual notes in the water department. with revenue staying stable throughout the months. May actually looks pretty good. Our May net loss is $2,500, which is actually $4,700 better than planned. And our year-to-date net loss for water is about $152,000, which is $26,000 over plan, but $20,000 of that we've talked about before with the Dingberg tank removal. As far as wastewater, our year-to-date net loss is $453,000, which is $125,000 over plan. Electric, as mentioned, revenues were down for May. Our May revenues were $180,000, which is $94,000 under plan. Our year-to-date net loss for electric is $533,000, which is about $99,000 over plan.
Can I ask some questions about electric? It's probably good. So I assume the fact that May is so low is just because we didn't have the right budget numbers?
Yeah, so
as opposed to less people came in May?
Right. The percentage that we used for the last 3 months of the year were off for electricity.
Right.
The last three.
And then looking at year to date, commercial was actually slightly ahead of budget. So assuming that wasn't due to increase in the fuel adjustment charge, assuming that wasn't the dominant thing, that would say for us to come in higher next year, it's going to be residential having more than it did in the previous year. Is that, am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, there is a small part also with budgeting numbers in that.
But this is looking at year to date, so it's 11 months out of the year.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So do we have a way of estimating, so how many, occupied days we need to make that work? I mean, we should be able to figure out how many more days people need to actually use their homes or rent their condo, and be able to compare that to, let's say, like probably 2010 was probably a great year for 10-11, if I remember correctly, and that could give us some insight into whether a strong ski year would produce the revenue we need. And I'm just wondering, does that reasoning make sense?
I think it's also weather, because what I would say in rentals especially is that if the weather's good for skiing, whether it's because you have a lot of snow or because it's nice out,
good point,
people are going to be out skiing.
So they need to be able to drive here.
If it's raining or if it's a blizzard or if it's windy, then they're inside, and that's when they're using all those televisions, and they're just using a lot more power, I think. And so I don't think it's just occupancy.
Yeah, I tried, when I was doing that, I tried to regress power consumption against skier days. I tried to regress it against occupancy, lodging occupancy, and there's correlation to all of it, but there's no dominant variable. It's a complicated equation.
Okay, but this would imply that for us to make the budget, it's an increase in residential usage. This is the only way it would happen.
That's what it looks like to me as well.
Okay. All right. Well, if you have any insights into what we might do, let me know, and we'll give it a try. Okay, thanks.
Yep. The last note is on propane. Propane revenues were also down in May. May revenues were $47,000. That was down $34,000 from plan. As of year to date, we're pretty much spot on. Net revenue is $276,000, which is $1,000 over plan.
Yeah, net income.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, net income. I mean, unless there's any other questions.
So maybe for the finance committee, the way I always look, the way I've been looking at it, is probably just to make myself feel a little bit better. But when I look at the overall and see that we're the consolidated income statement, and I see that we are through 11 months, $270,000 loss. Essentially, the way I think about it is that we simply aren't covering all of our depreciation. And I think it's partly I think about it because prior to all of our new financing and new financial systems and upgrading how we do our financials and so on, I don't think depreciation was ever really taken into account. So what it seems to me is rather than covering $1.4 million of depreciation, we're really only covering $1.1 million of depreciation, which isn't good. I mean, it means you're not able to replace things and do proper maintenance and all those other things. But it's not like we are still generating cash. Okay.
Is there a consolidated income statement?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did I miss it? Which page number is it?
It was a
on
separate
the
file.
PDF,
Oh,
it would be
it's a
page
separate
3.
file.
Oh.
All right. Thank you.
Also supplemental, there's an updated operating cash waterfall report. It shows our actual June revenue at about 2.3 million. And then I've added in the budget numbers from the budget presented today. It shows that our cash low is in December of 13 at 1.5 million. So we'll keep this updated monthly. This is just operating cash at this point.
Any questions of Jill?
I just had one more update on, just a quick one on the audit. The auditors, we had 3 members from AKT come out on June 10th. They stayed for 3 days and did the pre-audit. It was actually very productive. They completed a lot of our expense testing and procedure walkthroughs that took a lot of the week that they were here last year. Once that was completed, they met with Michael and myself, and we just went over what we went through and what will be done. They're coming back August 5th to complete the audit, and we talked about it. There should be absolutely no problem with getting the audit complete on time this year. We talked about no later than the end of September to have the audit complete.
Very good.
And we'll bring that back as a regular item until it is complete.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay, we now move to agenda item 10, committee reports, communications.
Okay, so a lot happened since the last meeting. So let me start first with a thank you to Cheryl and Drew, who got the new website. It was primarily their efforts who got that up and running. So
it's a great website.
Yeah, so it's visually obviously much stronger than what we had before. It's a similar amount of information, but with plans to add more. So I appreciate both of their efforts. We also, for the first time, did online registration for the fire department event, and so we had 146 registrations through the online system, which actually got a little bit later start than the offline one. So presumably that was a benefit.
They doubled our pre-registration.
Yeah.
It was nice to just as far as operations, it was nice to know that we had 275 people coming before we even opened the doors. So we knew we were going to have a productive day even before we started selling tickets.
That's really great.
Yeah, and we learned how to do it better for next year. So, and it was the total cost of doing that was $20, which maybe we can negotiate down to 15 if we're a nonprofit. So for next year, we'll do that. We also put together the online survey, which Cheryl also drove, and I appreciate her efforts. And we put that out on Monday, and it went to about 700 emails. And there were multiple emails per household. As of this morning, 99 people took the survey, which is quite a high percentage of total, and 82 finished the survey. The slackers will be identified in a public hearing in September, and we'll investigate further.
Well, I will admit to being one of those because I didn't think I should actually send it in.
So,
I didn't think it was fair, that I was so complimentary to the whole district.
Okay, that's a good point. I didn't take that consideration when I finished mine. So that's one point. We'll send out several more email reminders. I would expect about 50% more the next reminder. But it's enough data to be meaningful, and so I thought I'd just highlight a couple of things.
Can I ask one question? If we got several emails about it, are we supposed to respond to all of them?
Oh, you only get a set. So you only got one email so far, and you only get one if you
No,
didn't
but I mean,
finish
I
it.
have more. You've sent more than one name, screen name. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
want to know if you want it back from all the screen names.
I'll leave it to your discretion to decide how best to handle that. So we have a written policy on that issue. So, I'll just summarize a couple of highlights that were meaningful to me. In terms of question 23, how would you rate the KMPUD in meeting your expectation? Almost 80% rated us as good to excellent in meeting expectations. So that's a good number. And then 3 people rated us as poor total, which is about 4% of respondents. And we encourage people to put their name down. So for those who did give us, criticism and gave their name, we have the ability to follow up with them and find out more. There was really only 2 or 3 people that really had pretty strong negative feelings about an experience with the district or whatever. But one I'll single out is somebody said, "You're great except for the rates. All I know is everything you touch gets more expensive."
Right.
And I do think that's a really valid criticism, that we should take a look back at saying, rates are now at 51 cents plus the surcharge. Why is that? And have we provided higher reliability for it? We kept up with deferred maintenance, but we have enough information that I think at the September review, when we do this public and look at the whole thing, it would be really helpful to basically answer the question, if Mountain Utilities was still running it, would rates be lower? And what have we gotten? What have we gotten for spending money, or are they in fact lower or whatever? And I think that would be a good exercise for us to do.
Yeah.
It will come out with, I think people should rightly be concerned about that. I think our goal as a utility is, first, high reliability, and I think the survey is very strong in that. And second is the lowest possible rates. And while I think we've done a lot to try to do that, particularly in terms of efficiency, we also had a huge amount of catch-up that had to be done that needs some explanation. So anyway, I think the survey's got a lot of good
That's
data.
great.
People want to know where we are as is. We can email it out.
Yeah, excellent.
Because I think there's enough people now that it's a meaningful amount of data.
Yeah, 15%.
What's the distribution list that you used? Is it from the billing system, or?
No, it's not, because that would be a lot less people.
Yeah.
This is the email I've developed over the last several years by pulling email systems together. So that's the only other thing I would say on communications. Our next steps are to expand the web's presence. So we have an online email system, so I can retire my private one. So that still needs to be done. And then also we want to put the community directory online. And Joe and I are evaluating providing more customer billing information directly through the website, so you don't have to log in to a separate system to do that. And then to look at what's the best way to provide unbilled information. That was very popular in the survey. So people could look and say, I'm not at home right now, is the home consuming energy?
Right.
They'd be able to answer that question from any place on the web if they authorize the information to be there. So those are our next 3 projects. I would expect that we could finish all those, in the next couple of months. But it's a second priority that maintaining the Out Valley schedule and getting the audit done and closing the end of the year. So these are second priority tasks, but we should be able to make a lot of progress on them.
Thanks. Carolyn, did you have a question?
I'd just like to say regarding communication and sort of from the survey, I think the customer service aspect is also very important. And I've had very good experiences with all of the staff on that issue. But I want to make sure that as you grow and you get busier and everybody gets busier, the fact that you could call someone up and talk to them, which I love, and then they do something, is great. And there's so many entities you deal with these days where that's not the case.
Yeah.
And so I hope that never goes away because it's working well, in my opinion.
That's really good. Very good comment.
Yeah,
That's good. Yeah.
I'd just like to say thank you. And one of the aspects that we're going to move on is a new telephone system and get rid of the automated attendant that frustrates people right now when they try to communicate us. It's our goal to answer phones with a live person, and I think that's what, that might not be where the trend is going, but that's customer service in our book. So.
Thanks, Bob. Bob, ND Planning.
Yeah, we had a planning committee meeting scheduled since the last board meeting, but we elected to delay that so that additional focus could be put on some of the documents that are being prepared for review on the Mellow Roost topic. So I don't know that there's anything specific to update on. Thoughts?
I think I updated it during the managers as far as the water study.
The water study, yes.
Thanks, Bob. Finance, Bob Epstein, do you want to take that one?
Yes. I'll just cover the things we didn't already cover. At the Finance Committee meeting, we reviewed the expense tracking and budgeting for Out Valley. I feel very comfortable that we have a good understanding of where we are on that. We talked about the 2014 budget. We talked about what we need to do to meet the tier requirements. We also discussed the Power Secure negotiations and reviewed the compromise proposal that was offered to them to try to settle and complete that. And I don't know, there's no update on that since doing that, but we are tracking that. And then I just want to reaffirm that our goal in the draws and the financing is to figure out is to be prepared the earliest moment we can reduce debt expense and start to move rates down after they peak in 2015. We're trying to do the planning for that, and that's what we feel. We feel that the number one criteria for a debt financing is to prevent exposure to higher interest rates, and to have money available to be able to drive rates down at the earliest possible period. Those are our main considerations.
Very good. Thank you. Operations and then capital, Peter.
I think we pretty thoroughly discussed everything. Did we leave anything out, Bob, that we haven't discussed in operations? I know capital projects we've already discussed everything.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Personnel, a couple things. Peter and I and Michael met earlier this week and went over the cafeteria plan for the CalPERS benefits, and I think we're all set to come back next month with that for approval or review and hopefully approval by the board. The other thing we did was we spent quite a bit of time going through the general manager's goals to wrap up the year, and so I want to report these in public, and then we'll be talking about more performance issues. I should say performance review, not performance issues. Performance review in closed session, but. It was an ambitious goal list covering all the areas: financial, capital, operating, planning, personnel, and communications. And our joint analysis was that depending on how you weight the importance of goals, it was someplace in the 92 to 93% completions, which was really, I think, outstanding given the kinds of goals. And of course, the most important ones, in our view, were to get our financing resolved, and so those were weighted higher, and getting the powerhouse complete. So those were the highest importance goals, but every other goal was also important. The least weighted one had to do with the establishing a plan for employee housing and housing funds and so on, which again is important, but it wasn't as important for this year, and progress has been made on that. So overall, it was about a 93%, in our judgment anyway, 93% accomplishment, which again I think was quite good. And I'm actually I'll write this up, and we'll put it in perhaps in the next board packet, Michael, so that all can see what our judgments were and can comment on them if they wish. And then related to this, we talked about setting goals for the next, for the current fiscal year. And what I've asked, and I think Michael will carry this message as well, that each committee chair take this to your next committee meetings and talk about it and establish what you think are the most important things for the district and the general manager to accomplish this fiscal year, so we can have a similar list of goals, and then the personnel committee will review those quarterly, and presumably each committee would review quarterly as well. Anything else, Peter, that I left out? Okay. We're now going to agenda item 11, with general discussion, opportunity for board members to ask questions for clarification, provide information to staff, propose agenda items, and so on. Are there any items from the board on agenda item 11?
Well, I was chatting with Michael about the August 10th board meeting and suggesting that I might want to dial into that, but we'll have to see how that goes, particularly if Mellow Roos is up on the agenda. That's an important one for my committee's focus. So I'd like to balance that with my last visit with my darling daughter before she returns to school for the fall, but we'll see how it plays out.
Okay.
Are other people, is Stanish going to be back by August 10th in the saddle?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else have any constraints on August 10th? Okay.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, we'll move. We are now moving to closed session to discuss personnel annual performance reviews pursuant to Government Code 54597.6. Thanks, everybody.